The story begins on a road surrounded by towering buildings. A car stops, and a man, the main protagonist, steps out. He is dressed in a black designer suit. Two other men, also in black suits, stand waiting for him. This man is Lee Joo-hyuk, the Strategic Development Department Manager from DG Group. After getting out of the car, he proceeds to a building accompanied by the two men. They take an elevator to the 10th floor. When the elevator doors open, a group of men bows and welcomes him. Joo-hyuk thinks he is the action leader of a gang corporation. He walks into a room and looks out the window, reflecting on how DG Group, ranked third in the financial circle, was created with gangsters at its core, forming a hooligan corporation. He then enters another room filled with books and continues to reflect. Having lived as a gangster for 15 years as an undercover police officer, he opens another room where a whiteboard filled with plans and a computer screen is visible. Looking at the whiteboard, Joo-hyuk marvels at how Joo Kyol-soo not only created a gang but also rose to the position of a leading chairman. Joo-hyuk's responsibility is to find evidence to prosecute Joo Kyol-soo and hand it over to the police. He needs a bit more conclusive evidence to send him to prison. As he ponders this, an anonymous number sends a message to Joo-hyuk's phone. Gwangjang Corporation skilled dealers 10 minutes on standby. Let's get together and play. Joo-hyuk puts his phone in his pocket and heads to the elevator, pressing the ground floor button. He is confused, wondering whose order to go to Gwangjang in 10 minutes. When he reaches the ground floor and the elevator doors open, he sees a group of men in suits waiting for him. Seeing this, Joo-hyuk is initially confused, then suddenly becomes unconscious. When he regains consciousness, he finds himself tied to a chair, his mouth covered with duct tape. He sees a big man in front of him who says he respects Joo-hyuk for taking out more than half of them in that situation. This man, seemingly the leader, removes the tape from Joo-hyuk's mouth and acknowledges his skills, noting that they are the real deal. Joo-hyuk respectfully asks why the man is doing this. The big man says Joo-hyuk knows the answer better than anyone else, or is he asking because he doesn't know? He reveals that he knows Joo-hyuk is a police officer and is impressed by his composure despite his cover being blown. The big man, after lighting a cigarette, admits he doesn't know who ratted Joo-hyuk out, saying it was an order from higher-ups. Joo-hyuk wonders who could have stabbed him in the back. Chief Song, Director Park, Detective Yoon? The big man blows smoke in Joo-hyuk's face, expressing how much the chairman adored him. Yet Joo-hyuk dared to lie for 15 years, proving he was very good at his job. Joo-hyuk's eyes fill with anger. Seeing this, the big man mocks his angry look, crushes his cigarette on the ground, and tells Joo-hyuk to say his last words, as he's grown fond of him over the years and will at least listen. Joo-hyuk responds with a smirk, telling him to tell Joo Kyol-soo to drop dead. The big man laughs loudly, acknowledging Joo-hyuk's spirit despite being over, and leaves, saying he'll see Joo-hyuk soon. Another man approaches Joo-hyuk with a knife, expressing his disappointment as he used to respect Joo-hyuk. Suddenly, Joo-hyuk kicks the man's leg, causing him to kneel, and then strikes him in the face, making him drop the knife. Joo-hyuk grabs the knife with his tied hands, cuts his restraints, and mocks the man for being an entry-level thug who can't do a single job properly. Seeing Joo-hyuk free, the other men are confused and afraid. Joo-hyuk challenges them, loosening his tie and saying, "Bring it, all of you." The gang members rush towards Joo-hyuk with deadly weapons. He defends himself against several attacks, fighting alone and thinking he might die today. Suddenly, a man appears behind Joo-hyuk with a knife. Joo-hyuk senses the attack, dodges, and counterstrikes, but another member manages to stab Joo-hyuk in the leg. In pain, Joo-hyuk reflects on his late father, recalling how it all began with an unfortunate accident. His father saved 12 civilians who had fallen onto the metro tracks due to a druggie's actions but couldn't save himself from the oncoming train. Joo-hyuk wonders if he will go to heaven like his father if he dies. During the fight, a gang member stabs Joo-hyuk in the stomach. Blood pours from his mouth as he thinks about the filthy things he has done as an undercover officer. The gang members repeatedly stab Joo-hyuk until he loses consciousness and collapses to the ground, seemingly dead. In his last thoughts, he wonders if someone like him will be accepted in heaven. In the next scene, we see a phone ringing and falling to the ground from a table. The year on the phone is 2005. A young Joo-hyuk wakes up and thinks that this doesn't seem like heaven. He is confused. He checks his phone and sees that it is 2005. He realizes that he has come back to a day shortly after his father's death. Joo-hyuk wonders how he could have come back to this day after crossing through dozens of years. Looking upwards, he considers whether his return is thanks to his father, a righteous man who saved people at the cost of his own life. Perhaps his father helped him from the heavens, making something like this possible. He clenches his fist, stands up, and checks his bank account passbook. He finds a 200 million won entry in his account. 100 million won was the reward his father received from the government for being a righteous man, and another 100 million won was the sum he received after being discharged from service. Joo-hyuk remembers that Fortune Publishing was a shell company used to conceal affiliations and that he was part of the headquarters intelligence detachment. After 4 years of service, 100 million won was given upon discharge. Tempted by those words, he applied, deciding for his father, who had raised him alone. Suddenly, he puts the passbook on a desk and thinks that he has done everything he needs to do at home. He wonders if he should head out. Joo-hyuk steps outside and sees Songpong-gu before its redevelopment. As he walks through its familiar streets, the reality of coming back to the past hits him. Passing by some stores, he thinks that it's been a while since he saw them. After his father suddenly passed away, to deal with his sadness, Joo-hyuk spent each day in a drunken stupor. Living like a bum for over a year, he eventually realized, upon seeing his emptying bank account, that he should at least do something. Joo-hyuk looks up at the sky and thinks that he should not have become a police officer. He tells himself to forget it. It's all in the past. He assures himself to stop thinking about it when he suddenly sees a karaoke bar that is closed. He smiles, thinking that if it is 2005, it is before the bar was closed down. He never thought he would see that place again. Closing his eyes, he remembers how the bar owner treated him well when he was a part-timer there. Curious, he wonders how the bar owner is doing. Suddenly, a loud noise comes from the bar. Joo-hyuk is shocked. Inside the bar, the owner is apologizing to 3 men. The bar owner explains that they are registered as a vocal practice room, so they don't have to sell alcohol. One of the men, wearing a designer shirt, tells the owner that everyone sells it in this town. The bar owner replies that they are a different kind of business. Hearing this, the man in the designer shirt grabs the bar owner's collar, lifts him, and accuses him of looking down on them. The bar owner warns that if the man continues acting that way, he will have to call the police. The man pushes the bar owner, causing him to fall to the ground, and challenges him to call the police. At that moment, Joo-hyuk opens the door of the bar and enters. He sees the bar owner on the ground, screaming. The man in the designer shirt looks at Joo-hyuk and demands that he leave. Joo-hyuk ignores him and walks towards the bar owner, respectfully telling him to hold on for a moment as he will call 119 for him. The man in the designer shirt puts his hand on Joo-hyuk's shoulder, but Joo-hyuk suddenly grabs his hand, pulls him forward, lifts him, and throws him to the ground, knocking him out. Seeing this, the other 2 men are afraid. Joo-hyuk looks toward the men and says, "How dare you use violence?" He then punches another guy, knocking him down. After subduing all 3 men, he calls 119 and reports that there is a patient who cannot move due to a hip injury from a fall. Joo-hyuk then checks on the bar owner's condition, asking if he is all right. The bar owner, surprised to see Joo-hyuk, asks how he is there. Joo-hyuk supports the bar owner and tells him not to talk or move, to keep taking deep breaths, and to hold on a little longer as he has called an ambulance. The bar owner thanks Joo-hyuk. After some time, the ambulance arrives, and one of the rescuers asks Joo-hyuk if he has any injuries. Joo-hyuk denies any injuries, so the rescuer says they will leave the rest to him. Joo-hyuk opens another room in the bar where the 3 men are kneeling. He asks them how they will compensate for the damage. One of them apologizes. Joo-hyuk tells them that they should be thankful he didn't hand them over to the police. Even though the police know the bar owner's personality, he would have agreed to settle. Joo-hyuk demands that they pay the hospital fees and an additional 12 million won each for settlement fees and repair and emotional damage costs, totaling 24 million won each, for a total of 72 million won. He tells them this should be enough to fix the wounded heart of the owner. The 3 men are surprised and confused about how they can manage to come up with such an amount. Joo-hyuk says that if someone sees him, they might think he is a loan shark. If these 3 guys are going to hit someone, they should be prepared to pay for the damage. It's not like anyone forced them to be violent, and their financial situation is none of his business. Joo-hyuk then asks where they will get the 72 million won. Joo-hyuk stands down and suggests that if they don't have money, they should make some. He tells them about a construction site building an apartment, and he happens to know the chief there. If they work hard enough, they can earn 100,000 won per day. Working 6 days a week for a month would make them 2.4 million won. They would need to work for 10 months to earn the 24 million won needed for the settlement and compensation costs. Hearing this, the men look down. Joo-hyuk places his hand on one of their heads and says, "Don't look so down." He smiles and tells them not to do something like this again. One of the men asks if Joo-hyuk is letting them go. Joo-hyuk denies this and they all apologize to him. Joo-hyuk asks them who they are. One of them says they haven't been in the area long since they came up from Tongyeong, so they didn't know the rules around here. They all join their hands and ask Joo-hyuk to go easy on them just this once. Joo-hyuk asks if they are all from Tongyeong. The man who seems to be the leader replies that they are from the Naples of Korea, Tongyeong. Joo-hyuk then asks him about his school. The man replies that he graduated from Muljan Elementary School. Joo-hyuk murmurs about Muljan Middle School. He then looks down, places his hand on his neck, and says, "I am Lee Joo-hyuk of the 22nd class of Muljan Middle School." One of the men, a fat guy, is surprised and suddenly remembers something about the name Joo-hyuk. Shocked, he says Joo-hyuk's name loudly. Joo-hyuk, surprised, asks him if he knows him. The fat guy replied that he had known Joo-hyuk when they were freshmen, noting that Joo-hyuk had been the boss of the school. Joo-hyuk had transferred during his first year, conquered the school until his third year, and had received scout offers from gangs. As a middle schooler, Joo-hyuk had fought against the seniors from Busan High and won, nearly conquering Masan before suddenly disappearing. The fat guy then asked if Joo-hyuk wasn't that legendary. Hearing this, the three guys were surprised and began to apologize, greeting Joo-hyuk respectfully. They introduced themselves as being in the 24th class and called Joo-hyuk Hyung-nim, which means big brother. One of them was named Dong-cheol, the fat guy was Keel-san, and the big guy was Seok. Joo-hyuk didn't expect them to be his school juniors and told them that this gave him more reason not to go easy on them, urging them to work hard starting the next day. The guys looked down and agreed with Joo-hyuk. Joo-hyuk then demanded their phones and IDs, stating he would confiscate them because they wouldn't have time to look at their phones at the construction site, and he would leave their IDs with the chief. He asked why they had come up from Tongyeong to Seoul, pointing out that there were organizations there too. Seok replied that they had received a scout offer. Joo-hyuk was surprised and asked from where. Dong-cheol replied it was from the Gangnam faction, adding that if Joo-hyuk didn't know, the Gangnam faction worked as spies and had contacted them first, wanting to scout them. Joo-hyuk wondered if it could be the Gangnam faction he knew and questioned why Joo Kyeol-soo would call these country bumpkins. It was currently 2005, and at that time, Joo Kyeol-soo had united all the organizations south of the Han River. Seok, noticing Joo-hyuk's expression, asked what was wrong. Joo-hyuk continued to ponder. After uniting the organization in the south of the Han River, Joo Kyeol-soo had started a war around 2006 and 2007. This meant these hooligans would be used as meat shields. To local gangsters, the Gangnam faction's love call was an uninhabitable proposition. Hundreds of guys like Seok would come to Seoul, with half of them becoming disabled and at least 100 people losing their lives. In the end, those who rose tenaciously would only be used and discarded by the organization. Joo-hyuk put his hand on his head, wondering what he should do. One of them asked if Joo-hyuk was perhaps in another organization. Seok told Joo-hyuk that they understood, explaining that although they were invited by the Gangnam faction, they had drastically shaken them off. Suddenly, Seok stood up and declared that they would follow Joo-hyuk. All three bowed and asked Joo-hyuk to take good care of them. Joo-hyuk was surprised by their behavior, thinking they believed he was in another organization. He then remembered he was back in 2005 and living as a normal citizen. He had joined the police in 2008 and infiltrated the Gangnam faction. That year, the Lehman Brothers financial crisis had occurred. After that, Joo Kyeol-soo, who had united Seoul, bought a vast amount of real estate and stocks with his immense cash reserves, becoming untouchable. But Joo-hyuk was in 2005 now. He thought he could break down Joo Kyeol-soo. Joo-hyuk asked if they would be loyal to him. They all confirmed they would. Joo-hyuk then told them to start working the next day. He asked for their names but quickly decided there was no need, calling them Muscle, Pig, and Dwarf. Joo-hyuk thought he could finally deal with Joo Kyol-soo, the root of all evil, who had been uncatchable by law for 15 years. He threw a cell phone towards Seakob and instructed them to come out immediately whenever he called. The guys were surprised, bowed, and agreed to his terms. In another scene, Joo-hyuk sees the three guys at a construction site sending unnecessary messages to him. Joo-hyuk ignores their messages and sits in a chair in his room, contemplating how to catch Joo Kyol-soo. He realizes that to get Joo Kyol-soo, he must build his power, which requires money. Currently, he has 200 million won. If he takes a loan with a lease as collateral, he could get up to 300 million won, totaling 500 million won. He needs to increase this amount as much as possible. He wonders if there is anything that could help. Suddenly, he hears a news report about Dr. Hwang Won-sik's stem cell research showing positive results. Joo-hyuk realizes he forgot to turn off the TV and listens to the report, which states that if the research on using embryonic stem cells for treatment is successful, transplantation without side effects will become possible, giving hope to many people. Joo-hyuk stands up and walks toward the TV, shocked to see the news about Dr. Hwang Won-sik. He remembers that this incident marked a significant moment in the history of science, beyond just the medical field. Dr. Hwang Won-sik, who gained fame for cloning animals, published a paper claiming that embryonic stem cells could be used to create human body parts. This news generated much excitement, especially among terminally ill patients. Unfortunately, it was all a fraud. Once Dr. Hwang Won-sik's study was revealed to be fake, stem cell stocks, which had been rising daily, plummeted into the abyss along with people's hopes. Joo-hyuk recalls that the bubble burst after the fraudulent thesis was exposed, but the stocks continued to rise until then. Smiling, Joo-hyuk thinks that 500 million won is not enough, and he needs to increase his holdings. Joo-hyuk then goes somewhere wearing a black suit. He opens the door to what looks like a shop and is greeted by a man smoking inside. The man asks why a young boy like Joo-hyuk is there. Joo-hyuk asks if the man is the boss. The man inquires why Joo-hyuk is looking for the boss. Joo-hyuk swings his hand and replies that he has nothing to discuss with lackeys. The man, frustrated by Joo-hyuk's behavior, stands and tries to punch Joo-hyuk. Joo-hyuk warns him not to make him repeat himself. Later, inside a building, the man is screaming as Joo-hyuk grabs his hands from behind and restrains him. The man yells that Joo-hyuk will rip his arms off and pleads for him to stop. Joo-hyuk comments that the man might be stupid but has a pretty good body. He chokes the man from behind and threatens to break either his neck or his arm if he doesn't comply. Joo-hyuk asks again where the boss is. Suddenly, another man appeared and remarked that this was where Joo-hyuk was. The man looked like the boss, also dressed in a suit. He told Joo-hyuk not to act like that outside and invited him to come in. The boss opened another door to his office, and Joo-hyuk followed him inside. There, Joo-hyuk saw a man being punished by the boss, trembling with blood coming from his head. The boss called the man, Mr. Choi, and told him to leave because a new customer had arrived. He also warned Choi that the next time he saw him, he better have his money. Choi thanked the boss, stood up, and left the office with a wound on his face. Joo-hyuk noticed Choi but then sat on a sofa in front of the boss. He commented that the boss should manage his employees, questioning how they dared to bare their teeth at a customer. The boss raised his finger and replied, calling Joo-hyuk a young friend, suggesting that while it might seem revolting to him, he should keep his manners. Joo-hyuk asked the boss if keeping his manners would allow him to borrow more money. The boss replied that Joo-hyuk was an interesting kid and that if he kept his manners, he would let him borrow double the usual amount. Joo-hyuk, skeptical, said that the boss was joking and questioned why everyone was so eager for attention these days. He added that he needed to hear the boss speak politely or someone would die. Then, suddenly, Joo-hyuk asked how much he could borrow if he kept his manners. The boss asked how much Joo-hyuk needed. Joo-hyuk replied, "As much as I can get." The boss estimated around 8 grand. Joo-hyuk denied and asked what the maximum amount was that the boss could give him right then. Hearing this, the boss lifted his cigarette, smiled, and said he would need collateral. Without collateral, he couldn't lend Joo-hyuk a large amount. Joo-hyuk thought that he had already used his place as collateral, so he didn't have much left, but there was still something people considered valuable as collateral. Joo-hyuk raised his finger, indicating himself, and said that his body could be collateral. He asked the boss if he had contacts with butchers, people who buy or receive bodies to cut off body parts. The boss, surprised, listened as Joo-hyuk explained that his blood type was O. He had never drunk alcohol or smoked, and there was no history of illness in his family. Joo-hyuk asked if that wouldn't be enough as collateral. The boss, astonished, asked if Joo-hyuk had been in a gang before. Joo-hyuk replied that he had been in the slums for years. The boss commented that he knew how things worked there but wondered why Joo-hyuk was still choosing to get a loan. Joo-hyuk responded that he was simply asking for money, not a drawn-out lesson. He didn't want to hear the boss's empty concerns and demanded to know how much money he could lend him. For a moment, they stared into each other's eyes. Then, suddenly, the boss said that with Joo-hyuk's eyes, liver, kidneys, and everything else, it should amount to roughly $150,000. The boss asked if Joo-hyuk wanted to sign the contract right away. Joo-hyuk asked what good a contract would do if it held no power in court. He then placed his ID on the table. The boss looked at the ID, and Joo-hyuk said that if he didn't pay back the money, the boss could come find him and get all his money back with the collateral. Joo-hyuk proposed that the money he would borrow should be $300,000. The boss was surprised, and Joo-hyuk, swinging his two fingers, said he had kept his manners, so he should get double the amount, an upfront loan of $300,000 in cash. After some time, Joo-hyuk exited with several boxes of cash and placed them inside his car. He thought that now that the money was in tens of thousands, it was a hassle to move around. He had around $600,000 together. Joo-hyuk got into his car, started it, and left the place. In the next scene, Joo-hyuk was seen in a cafe, talking with a person who had blonde hair. The person, sipping tea, expressed his surprise at Joo-hyuk's youth, noting that Joo-hyuk was much younger than he had expected. Smiling, he mentioned that although he had engaged in many risky investments, it was his first time dealing with someone as young as Joo-hyuk. He then lifted a suitcase, explaining that he had brought his side of the transaction in stocks, and asked Joo-hyuk what currency he had. Joo-hyuk replied that he had his in cash. Joo-hyuk thought to himself that the first step in his plan to achieve his goal was to buy Madison Posters at a cheap price, the representative stocks in stem cell research. Madison Poster was a category of currency yet to be registered in the current stock market, and it was the quickest rising category after professors like Dr. Hwang Woo-suk announced their groundbreaking stem cell research. Joo-hyuk knew he had to stock up on Madison Posters. Smiling at the blonde-haired person, Joo-hyuk suggested they make a deal. The person confirmed that Joo-hyuk had agreed to $20 per stock. Joo-hyuk affirmed this. The person then remarked that while he was excited to sell his stock at that price, he felt a bit bad about doing this type of deal with someone so young. He asked Joo-hyuk if he knew the public price for Madison Posters. Joo-hyuk replied that he had heard it was $10. The person pointed out that Joo-hyuk was paying practically double the publicly listed price and asked if he believed the price of these posters would rise that much. Joo-hyuk thought about how stock prices could change dramatically in a short time, turning from worthless to highly valuable. He simply replied that he trusted Dr. Hwang Woo-suk and asked if they could proceed with the deal. After the deal was completed, they were seen in a parking lot where Joo-hyuk handed over the cash. They said goodbye, but as Joo-hyuk walked toward his car, the person called out to him. The person shared that he had been making a living off the stock market for around 20 years and, looking at Joo-hyuk as if he were his son, advised him not to be offended by what he was about to say. He suggested that Joo-hyuk should know there was a time to buy and a time to sell, and with just enough profit, one could overturn a few losses and make money. He cautioned that if Joo-hyuk invested with the intent to make a fortune, he might lose everything quickly. He then reassured Joo-hyuk that he was sure he would know how to do well on his own. Joo-hyuk thanked him for the advice, thinking the person was a good guy who had survived in the stock market for 20 years. Joo-hyuk then asked for his business card, which the man provided, saying that Joo-hyuk should feel free to contact him with any inquiries about investing. Joo-hyuk thanked him again, got into his car, and thought that now that he had completed the first step, he should move on to the next. Joo-hyuk called Dong-cheol and told him that he would send him the address via text, instructing him to go there when it became night. Seok-hob on the call asked where it would be, and Joo-hyuk replied that it was a nightclub. In the next scene, They were at the nightclub, surrounded by many attractive girls. The three were excited, but Joo-hyuk was upset and instructed them to take off their clothes and throw them away as soon as they got inside. He promised to give them a card to get themselves suits. They were happy and asked why it was needed. Joo-hyuk just told them to do as he said, and they all agreed. Joo-hyuk also told them not to call him sir when they were outside. Suddenly, a man with red hair appeared and introduced himself as Chan-ho Park, the server assigned to them. He asked where they would like to go. Seok-hob, angry, scolded him, asking if he had to tell him every little thing. The server apologized and offered to lead them to their rooms, but Joo-hyuk said they were fine and just wanted a table. The server agreed to get them a table. Seok-hob approached Joo-hyuk and suggested they save face, but Joo-hyuk cut him off, asking who was going to pay. Later, the server informed them that their table was ready, and they all sat down. After they were seated, the server asked if they would like some liquor. Joo-hyuk replied that they would each have a beer and 3 bottles of plain liquor, along with some basic sides. He added that they didn't need to book a room, they were only there to listen. They then turned their attention to the stage. Joo-hyuk drank some water and noticed that there were many empty seats. A nightclub in Cheongdam-dong should have been filled with people, especially during peak hours, but it was empty. Joo-hyuk thought about taking over the nightclub, planning to turn it into a regular club. Nightclubs required booking for tables and many other things, but clubs did not. Joo-hyuk grabbed a beer jug, thinking about how Joo Kyol-soo was currently acquiring funds by running illegal businesses in Gangnam. He was sure they were trying their best to recruit more thugs, as they would need a lot of money and men when their war went into full swing. Joo-hyuk looked at the 3 of them, who were eating too much, and thought that he would give hundreds of living meat shields food and a place to sleep. He wondered how much it would cost to maintain something like that. He imagined that if a club opened in Cheongdam-dong, all of Joo Kyol-soo's club investors in Seoul would rush to gather there, leaving Joo Kyol-soo's club empty and struggling with maintenance fees. It would be impossible for Joo Kyol-soo to stick to his plans. Suddenly, Dong-cheol asked Joo-hyuk why they came to the nightclub if they weren't going to book a room. Joo-hyuk raised a glass of drink and replied that they were going to do the holdouts that people did in real estate, buying land in a planned redevelopment area in advance and selling it at a high price to the developers. If Joo-hyuk succeeded in nightclub land speculation as he planned, the guy who lost his funding line would not be able to execute his plan. As they finished their drinks, they all stood up, and Joo-hyuk paid the bill and left the club. However, Joo-hyuk noticed that the 3 guys were following him. Joo-hyuk asked them why they kept following him and told them to go home. Dong-cheol asked him for a favor, requesting if Joo-hyuk could lend them 10,000 won. Joo-hyuk asked what they were going to do with that. One of them explained that they lived in a monthly rental room and couldn't afford to pay the rent, having spent almost all the money they brought. Hearing this, Joo-hyuk told them to follow him, surprising all 3 of them. In the next scene, Joo-hyuk was at his home with the 3 of them. They were amazed at how big Joo-hyuk's place was. Joo-hyuk then told them that starting today, they could live there. Initially surprised, Joo-hyuk showed them a room and told them to sleep there. Seok-hob asked if they could really live there, and Joo-hyuk told him not to make him repeat himself. Joo-hyuk also told them to eat there as well. Seok-hob, filled with joy, thanked Joo-hyuk and asked how they could repay his kindness. All 3 guys then knelt in front of Joo-hyuk and thanked him loudly, disturbing Joo-hyuk's neighbor, who got angry because it was night. The next day, Joo-hyuk was sitting on a chair, looking at his computer. He saw something surprising, a graph of a stem cell company showing 5 consecutive wins, indicating a bull run. Joo-hyuk thought that maybe because he used to live on alcohol, he didn't realize Dr. Hwang Woo-suk's influence was that big. He saw news about a clone dog named Snuppy and realized that all stem cell-related stocks were hitting their peak. Looking at the stock chart reminded him of the old days. He recalled that gangsters didn't hesitate to do all sorts of bad things, including something called Operation Stock. The method involved gradually acquiring shares of a certain company, ensnaring securities firms, brokers, or experts, and spreading false information to attract individual investors. When the rumors spread enough to create a bullish rise graph, they would sell everything and disappear without a trace. Naturally, from then on, the stock price would drop endlessly, and individual investors who believed the false information would bear huge losses. Many people must have taken their own lives because of this. Joo-hyuk used to live doing such things before he returned to the past. This time, under the pretext of performing a secret mission, he wouldn't create such a situation. Joo-hyuk thought about when he should sell, recalling only how many times it rose. He didn't know when to sell out. Then he saw the business card of the blonde-haired person he met in the cafe. He saw the name Chio Hyosiop, director of HS Investment Research Institute. Joo-hyuk flipped the card and saw the name John Hyo, which surprised him. He remembered something about the past and wondered if that guy was John Hyo, the legend of the investment world. Joo-hyuk recalled that in his past life, he once calculated John Hyo's return on investment and was almost fainted from surprise. If someone steadily made a 25% profit for 35 years with 10 million won, it would become 24.65 billion. Joo-hyuk was amazed that he had traded with such an incredible person. He remembered John Hyo's advice about incremental selling, just like incremental buying. When a decent profit was made, sell and keep the profit. Joo-hyuk clicked the mouse, thinking about selling 10,000 shares, placed an order and sold them. Smiling, he decided to follow the director's advice. However, Joo-hyuk thought about whether he should start wrapping up. The total profit, including the seed amount, was 2.91 billion won. Joo-hyuk marveled at how knowing the future was amazing, but it was still not enough for him. He needed at least 10 billion to transform a nightclub into a club. Joo-hyuk realized he needed to pay back the money he borrowed from Yongwang loan. He wondered where he could borrow some money. Suddenly, he got an idea and smiled. He then went to where he had gone earlier for a loan, a place called Glory Loan. Inside the loan building, the boss's guys were beating up a debtor. The debtor pleaded, saying he wouldn't run away again and would pay back the money. They had baseball bats. Suddenly, Joo-hyuk appeared at the door and asked if they were some kind of children, telling them to turn on the light and live a bit. One of them asked Joo-hyuk how he got there. Joo-hyuk replied that he didn't have to explain how he got there every time he came. He also told them to call their boss. Frustrated, one guy said that Joo-hyuk didn't know where he was, calling the boss casually. Another one said that if Joo-hyuk came to borrow money, he should be begging. A guy with a designer shirt, who had been beaten up earlier by Joo-hyuk, tried to stop the three guys. Joo-hyuk repeated that he was saying it for the last time. Bring the boss quickly before they got hurt. The three of them approached Joo-hyuk, and one of them said they needed to educate him a bit. Suddenly, Joo-hyuk punched the first guy who talked and then delivered back-to-back punches to the others. The guy on the sofa was surprised to see all the guys knocked down. Joo-hyuk sat near him and said that even though it was already their second meeting, his hospitality was still a mess. Joo-hyuk put his hand on the guy's neck and smiled, saying he would give him a solution and to get ready for a slap. After some time, the guys with bats were on their knees sitting on the floor. Joo-hyuk continuously slapped the guy in the designer shirt. Suddenly, a boss appeared at the door, looking angry. He demanded to know what Joo-hyuk was doing there. Joo-hyuk, relieved, replied that it was a bit of a harsh tone towards someone who was there to pay him back. He then showed the boss a suitcase and asked if he should leave. Joo-hyuk stood up and asked the boss if he was not going to count the money. Frustrated, the boss told the debtor that it was enough and to just leave right now. Joo-hyuk and the boss then went to the boss's office and sat on a sofa. Joo-hyuk opened the suitcase, revealing it was filled with cash. He told the boss that he brought 33 million won in cash and even took care of the 10% interest, asking where he could find a debtor like him. Suddenly, the office door opened, and the guy in the designer shirt appeared with a glass of hot drink. Joo-hyuk told the boss to get the contract quickly. The boss, sounding angry, told Joo-hyuk to shut up as he could only let so much slide. Joo-hyuk then grabbed the cup of hot drink, brought it close to his mouth, looked at it, and suddenly threw it in the boss's face. The drink was hot, causing the boss's face to burn, and he screamed in pain. Joo-hyuk thanked the guy who brought the hot water and told the boss that he knew loan sharks so well that he could not talk to them nicely. He added that while his side was lacking before, it wasn't today. Joo-hyuk then asked the boss if he thought normal citizens could pay back 200% or 300% interest rates. He criticized the boss for harassing people at their workplaces, picking fights for no reason, thrashing them around, and robbing them of anything they called wealth. Joo-hyuk got close to the boss's face and said that while those who borrowed were not great either, the debtor was a total son of a bitch. Hearing this, the boss took out a knife from his suit and angrily cursed it at Joo-hyuk, attempting to stab him. However, Joo-hyuk pushed the table between them, causing the boss to stumble, and then grabbed the knife with his hand. He swung the knife and remarked that carrying a knife and not hesitating to stab someone was not a skill one got after doing it once. The boss asked who Joo-hyuk was. Joo-hyuk placed the knife on his shoulder and replied that he was a debtor who was there to pay him back. Joo-hyuk then asked the boss where he worked, but the boss replied, asking why he would tell him that. In response, Joo-hyuk grabbed the boss's hand, placed it on the table, and stabbed the knife into the table between the boss's fingers. The boss, terrified, screamed. Joo-hyuk noticed a board on the wall and thought about how, 5 to 6 years ago, a group merged with the Gangnam Gang. If a group was taken over by another head, the group itself naturally ceased to exist. In that case, these thugs were forced to choose one of two options: continue working as a thug for the new group or leave the group with reasonable severance pay. Joo-hyuk concluded that the boss was one of the latter. Joo-hyuk then asked the boss why he left his life as a gangster and if he didn't want to work under Kyeolsu. The boss, shocked, asked if Joo-hyuk was with the police. Joo-hyuk denied it and asked why the boss left the group. Hearing Kyeolsu's name, the boss's face turned to fear, and he said that Kyeolsu was a scary man. Joo-hyuk asked if he didn't want to slowly end that life now. Joo-hyuk then suggested to the boss that he could put an end to the filthy way he was playing with debtors and make a lot of quick money one last time to settle down. The boss replied, asking what he meant. Joo-hyuk placed his hand on the table and asked how much money the boss had right now. The boss replied that including what he had lent as a loan shark, it was about 6.5 billion won. Joo-hyuk then said to take all that money and invest it where he was investing. He promised to give the boss 30% of the profits. The boss asked how much that would be. Joo-hyuk explained that he could use 50% of his investment. If he invested 6.5 billion won, his profit would be 3.25 billion won, and 30% of that was at least 1 billion won. Joo-hyuk suggested that the boss take that money and, along with what he already had, retire. The boss smiled and asked if Joo-hyuk was really telling him to retire with just that amount. Joo-hyuk replied that if the boss didn't want to, that was fine, but he questioned whether the boss had Kyeolsu's permission for his current money-lending business. He reminded the boss that the Gangnam Gang had control over the Gangnam and Seocho districts and that Songpa was an ambiguous location. Joo-hyuk then asked the boss if he thought Kyeolsu would be okay with that. He warned the boss that if Kyeolsu found out, he would claim Songpa as his territory and demand to know how the boss dared to do business without informing him. The boss told Joo-hyuk not to do it. Joo-hyuk replied that he would see what the boss did first, but in return, the boss had to invest. The boss took some time to think about it and then agreed, saying that within 1 week, he would prepare the 6.5 billion won in cash. After completing the deal, Joo-hyuk turned back to leave the office, but when he reached the door, the boss asked if he thought he would be safe after that. Joo-hyuk replied that he believed he would be. The boss reminded him not to forget his background and warned that he would have to watch his back his whole life. Joo-hyuk responded that the boss could do whatever he wanted, but if he tried anything, he had to make sure he succeeded because if he didn't, Joo-hyuk would kill him. He then closed the door and left the office. After some time, Joo-hyuk left, and the boss rested on the sofa, placing ice bags on his knees. The guy who was close to the boss and looked like a manager came in and asked if they should round up their guys from the southwestern faction. The boss replied not to mess with Joo-hyuk. The manager was surprised and asked if the boss would just let that slide, saying Joo-hyuk was a total thug. The boss replied, saying, "Are we not gangsters too?" He then sat up and told the manager that Joo-hyuk was a veteran. Grabbing a cigarette box, the boss said that Joo-hyuk had lived a rough life. He didn't know where Joo-hyuk was from, but he was definitely a veteran. It was not his first time stabbing someone. If they messed with him, they could end up leaving this world without anyone finding out about it. The boss lit a cigarette and said they should just invest, hoping to make at least 1 billion won, and prayed they could get more. The boss then asked the manager if Joo-hyuk had said his hometown was Cheongju. The manager confirmed this. The boss then said they should go there once everything was settled. He mentioned he was from Ulleungdo Island but didn't want to go back there. In the next scene, we see Joo-hyuk driving his car, thinking about his assets. He's worried that he doesn't have enough money. Suddenly, he gets an idea and pulls out John Hyo's business card from his pocket. He then calls John and makes an appointment. Joo-hyuk goes to John's office and thanks him for helping him make a lot of profit. John grabs some coffee for Joo-hyuk and tells him that he succeeded because he was a young person with guts who took on a challenge. John smiles and says that catching the leader in the middle of a stem cell craze made it obvious that Joo-hyuk would earn a huge profit. Joo-hyuk explains that he contacted John because he needed to ask a question about stocks. John tells him to ask anything. Joo-hyuk asks about the probability of Madison poster falling. John takes a moment to think and then says the probability of it falling is 99%. Joo-hyuk asks why he thinks that way. John replies that a company with no results to show has risen way too high. Just because of the stem cell keyword, its stock skyrocketed to almost 10 times its original value, so of course it's going to drop. John takes a sip of his coffee and notes that they've already seen results with clone dogs, so there's not much growth to speak of. Hearing this, Joo-hyuk thinks John is truly worthy of being called a legend in the investment world. John guesses that Joo-hyuk is thinking about loan transactions. If a stock falls, he can choose the route of making a profit from loan transactions, also known as short selling. John says the fall of Madison poster is anticipated, meaning the profit from loan transactions is 100% certain. Joo-hyuk confidently states that he believes Madison poster will definitely fall. To make more profit on his investment, he got in touch with John. Joo-hyuk tells John that he would like to borrow for his investment. John thinks for a moment and says that 10 billion won is possible for him. Joo-hyuk says he needs more and offers John half of the profit, asserting that Madison poster will definitely fall, and he doesn't want to miss that chance. John takes his time to consider and then raises a finger, saying that the stock market always has a 1% variable that can never be ascertained. Because of that, they don't know what will happen with Madison poster stock. John asks Joo-hyuk what he will do if he faces a loss. Joo-hyuk replies that he has 9.5 billion in funds. If that variable causes the loss to exceed 9.5 billion, he will dispose of all those stocks and repay all the money he borrowed from John. Seeing a different aura in Joo-hyuk's face, John stands up, shakes hands with Joo-hyuk, and makes a deal to lend him 2 billion won. In the next scene, Joo-hyuk is in his room, sitting at his computer table. He thinks about the total of 25.9 billion won he has invested in loan transactions. He is confident that Madison poster will break through the lower floor. Suddenly, someone knocks on the door. Joo-hyuk stands up and opens it to find the 3 guys he helped before. He asks them about dinner but is shocked to see their faces badly injured, as if someone beat them up. Joo-hyuk asks what happened. Jacob replies that guys from the services came to stop the construction. Joo-hyuk asks why they would stop a building construction that was going fine. They say they are not sure, but the men came with iron rods and caused a mess to stop the work, so they couldn't endure it and aggressively confronted them. Joo-hyuk wonders if it was Joo Kyol-soo. He thinks now is not the time for him to proactively jump into the construction industry. Right now, he is focused on the adult entertainment industry. He asks if there are any other people also breaking in. Joo-hyuk asks Jacob if the chief was hurt. Jacob replies that he took a few hits too. Joo-hyuk, confused, asks exactly who did it. Dong-cheol replies that he saw clearly it said Moonchong construction material on the back. Joo-hyuk stands up and tells them they worked hard and should take a shower before sleeping. The 3 of them are confused. Joo-hyuk then starts his computer and thinks about the early stages of construction, where all sorts of corruption occur as gangsters exploit profits. If they start building without corruption, they use different methods. One such method is through construction materials. Thugs force and threaten building owners to purchase construction materials from them. But the materials they provide are all grade B or worse. When the landowner rejects the purchase, the thugs go on a rampage and stop the construction. Due to the nature of construction work, which suffers losses the longer it is delayed, the building owner is eventually forced to use low-quality materials with tears in his eyes. Joo-hyuk finds the address for Moonchong construction material. The next day, we see the Moonchong construction material building. A black car arrives in front of the building, and someone opens the car door and steps out. It is 5:11 in the early morning. Joo-hyuk, wearing a black jacket and black cap, is ready to confront those guys. Joo-hyuk opens the door and looks around. The workers at the company say that the place is not open for public entry. One guy walks toward him and asks what he's looking around for, using some rude words. Joo-hyuk replies asking what sort of company this is if they don't even display any construction materials. The guy who approached him asks who he is. Joo-hyuk grabs his fist and asks if it's just 7 of them or if more will come. The guy asks which gang Joo-hyuk works for. Joo-hyuk says no one and punches him in the face. The guy falls to the ground. Seeing this, the other guys are surprised and wonder who Joo-hyuk is. Joo-hyuk asks them if their boss is in yet or if he hasn't arrived. He then grabs a chair nearby and places it by the door, blocking it. He says they don't need to know who he is. They just need to know that now is the time for them to take a beating. One guy runs toward him with a hammer, followed by the others. The hammer guy tries to strike Joo-hyuk, but Joo-hyuk dodges and kicks him in the stomach, then punches him in the face. He faces all the guys single-handedly. After knocking them all out, Joo-hyuk kneels near the guy with the hammer, who is sitting on the ground. Joo-hyuk asks him if it hurts, telling him he shouldn't mess with innocent civilians. Joo-hyuk heard they hit the chief. The guy asks what kind of person Joo-hyuk is. Joo-hyuk asks if he is the boss there or not. The guy doesn't reply, so Joo-hyuk says it doesn't matter as long as he can use him to set an example. Joo-hyuk grabs his hand, puts a pen between his middle finger and another finger, and tells him that breaking his middle finger can hurt in several spots. He then asks again when his boss is coming. The guy looks up at Joo-hyuk, who suddenly puts his leg on the guy's hand, twisting his middle finger and causing him to scream in pain. The other knocked out guys see this and are terrified. Joo-hyuk asks once more when his boss is coming. Suddenly, someone speaks loudly at the door, asking if anyone has come to work. The boss arrives outside the door and tells another worker to take the key and open it. The worker mentions hearing something from inside. The boss replies, "What to hear?" Suddenly, Joo-hyuk opens the door and says to the boss that he is quite late and should come inside. The boss wonders who Joo-hyuk is and sees the other workers knocked out. Joo-hyuk says he's the Reaper who is there to slash his throat. Sometime later, we see the boss's face covered with wounds and injuries. He tries to speak but can't due to his injuries. Joo-hyuk inflicted all the injuries by beating him and the others. Joo-hyuk says the boss just took a few hits to the face, so what happened to his pronunciation? Joo-hyuk accuses the boss of pushing the construction materials to gain profit, telling them to use iron rods and blackmailing them into using subpar concrete from a company that bribed him. Joo-hyuk then punches him again and again, mentioning that the Seongsu Bridge and Sampong Mall also collapsed. He asks if the boss didn't learn anything after seeing that. People close to him were hurt and couldn't gather their senses because of the pain. Joo-hyuk says the chief had to get psychotherapy because the boss beat up his kids so badly that it affected his mental stability. But in reality, they don't go to psychotherapy. Joo-hyuk just wants the boss to realize his mistakes. He then smiles and says that the owner mentioned that the loss from the construction delay is no joke, and the compensation for damages will be accordingly. Joo-hyuk demands around 600 million in compensation, turns his back, and starts to leave, saying the boss should prepare the cash by tomorrow morning. The boss says that Joo-hyuk's demand is harsh. Joo-hyuk looks back and replies that calling in thugs, threatening unwilling landlords, and forcing them to use inferior materials is harsh. Joo-hyuk warns that if the boss brings a bond or any evidence, he will burn it. Joo-hyuk then says that if he doesn't get the cash by tomorrow, it will be doubled. He then closes the door and leaves. In the next scene, we see Joo-hyuk on his laptop, looking at a chart of Madison stock. He notices that it has fallen to 1 million, and the average price of stocks borrowed through loan transactions is 1 million, so now it is in the profit zone. Behind Joo-hyuk, his 3 friends also see the chart. One of them says he doesn't understand it. Seok asks Joo-hyuk if he makes money when the price falls since he thinks stocks make money when their price goes up. Joo-hyuk replies that there's no need to complicate it. To give an example, he asks Seok for 10,000 won. Seok gives Joo-hyuk 10,000 won, and Joo-hyuk says he borrowed 10,000 from him and paid back only 5,000 won. He gives 5,000 won back to Seok and asks him what will happen. Seok thinks and says that 5,000 was stolen from his pocket. Hearing that, Joo-hyuk puts his hand on his head. Suddenly, Dongcheol answers that it means Joo-hyuk borrowed stocks at 10,000 won and returned them at 5,000 won. The difference of 5,000 won stays with him as profit. Hearing that, Joo-hyuk becomes happy and says Dongcheol is correct. Dongcheol says he may look like that, but he was a good student in middle school. If it weren't for his dad's credit card debt, he would have even gone to college in Seoul. Joo-hyuk thinks that Dong-cheol was a victim of the credit card crisis and needs to get this guy to study. Joo-hyuk asks Dong-cheol if he graduated from high school. Dong-cheol says yes. Joo-hyuk tells him to stop going to the construction site from now on. He will speak with the captain and see if he can get him assigned to the General Affairs and Accounting Department to learn the work from there. Learning the numbers would be better for Dong-cheol. Seeing this, the other two are happy for Dong-cheol because now he won't need to go to the construction site. Joo-hyuk thinks that if Dong-cheol goes from construction to office work, there will always be people jealous of him, but for these best friends, they are all one. Suddenly, Joo-hyuk stands up and tells them not to drink at dinner today and to sleep early because they have somewhere to go tomorrow. They ask Joo-hyuk where. Joo-hyuk replies, Moonchong Construction Material. In the next scene, we see Joo-hyuk and his friends in a car waiting in front of Moonchong Construction's main building. Joo-hyuk asks Dong-cheol how many people went in. Dong-cheol replied that 33 people went up to the office on the second floor. Joo-hyuk comments that it's a lot, then asks the other two if they're up for it. Joo-hyuk has nicknames for his friends. Dong-cheol is a little guy, Chonsun is fatty, and Seok-hob is big guy. Joo-hyuk then tells Dong-cheol that he worked hard staying up all night and should return to his room to relax. But Dong-cheol denies it, pulls out a rod, and grabs it tightly, saying that he needs to get revenge. Seeing this, Joo-hyuk smiles. All four of them are ready to attack Moonchong Construction Material, armed with weapons. They all sit behind their car, looking toward the main building's second-floor window. The fatty guy holds a Molotov cocktail. Joo-hyuk tells him to light it up and throw it. The fatty guy replies, yes. Inside the building on the second floor, a large number of thugs in black suits are gathered. They all talk about who called them there. One of them takes out a cigarette and tries to light it, but another guy stops him, saying the place isn't ventilated. Despite this, the first guy lights the cigarette. Suddenly, the Molotov cocktail flies through the window near him and spreads fire on the floor. Panic ensues as all the thugs run toward the stairs. The big guy, Seok-hob, intercepts them and starts hitting them with a bat. The main boss watches the chaos, then turns and jumps out of a second-floor window, landing on Joo-hyuk's van. Unfortunately for him, Joo-hyuk is there. Joo-hyuk grabs his hair and calls him Mr. Park, reminding him that he was supposed to have the money ready, but it looks like he brought some friends instead. Park tries to explain, but Joo-hyuk cuts him off, saying that ignoring his goodwill was a mistake and asks how much the settlement money should be. After some time, the three guys beat all the thugs on the second floor and put out the fire. Park kneels in front of Joo-hyuk, pleading with him not to do this. Joo-hyuk tells him to have 600 million won ready, and he'll let him go. Park asks if he's serious and questions why he owes him 600 million. Joo-hyuk acknowledges it might be too much but points out that bringing those thugs there was not good. If he had gone in without knowing, he could have died. Joo-hyuk tells him he could face charges for gang assault and attempted murder. Does he want to take that to court? Joo-hyuk then leans closer and says that unlike Park, he doesn't have assault charges. Who does Park think the judge will believe? Joo-hyuk puts his hand on a table and points to a locker under it. He tells Park to open it. Park opens the locker, revealing a large amount of cash and gold bars. Joo-hyuk then told the little guy that Park had all kinds of valuables, from gold to hard cash. He advised the little guy to keep his money safe by diversifying, not just keeping it in cash or gold. He explained that when the Korean won became unstable, it was better to use US dollars and Japanese yen, and if the entire world's economy turned red, gold would be a better option. The little guy responded that he would learn it in a week. Seeing his attitude, Joo-hyuk appreciated it. Joo-hyuk then instructed them to take 120 million in cash and all of the gold. The three of them grabbed gold bars and bundles of cash from the locker and put them into bags. They noticed that Park had foreign currency as well. Park suddenly spoke to Joo-hyuk, asking where he had come from and who was allowing him to pull stunts like this. Joo-hyuk humorously replied that he was from Korea on planet Earth and that he was an ape.